Okay, good morning, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining the third session of our series, Partnering with HUD on Affordable Housing, Best Practices for State Governments. In our previous two sessions, we talked about the significance of home ownership and the preservation of our existing housing stock. Today, we're discussing housing development, a subject that's been top of mind for many legislators and agency officials looking for solutions to the housing shortage and for bringing down the cost of housing. Fortunately, we have several experts with us who will lead this discussion, talking about the resources that are available and, of course, how states can work with the federal government to achieve their goals. From HUD, we'll be hearing from Mike Hollar, senior economist, Chris Granger, housing capital improvement specialist, and Willie Fobbs, the director in the Office of Multifamily Production. Afterwards, we'll hear from Commissioner Sheila Mosquera-Bruno, who since 2019 has been leading Connecticut's Department of Housing. So, of course, we have a lot to cover today, but first up, it's my pleasure to introduce David Sanchez. He's the Chief of Staff for the Federal Housing Administration, and he'll talk about the role of his office and their approach to these issues. So, David, whenever you're ready.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Joseph. And thanks to everyone for being here today. I'm delighted to be here just to offer a few opening words before you hear from our true experts later on the call. As Joseph mentioned, my name is David Sanchez, and I'm the acting chief of staff for the Federal Housing Administration and the Office of Housing. We play a large number of roles, in our housing ecosystem, including, we are the home of the 3.5% down payment first-time home buyer mortgage option that many people know the name FHA from. In addition, I'm delighted to say that we have a number of programs that support the development of new affordable housing. I'm grateful that my colleague Willie Fobbs is going to talk today about some of those programs that reside specifically within the Office of Housing. More broadly, the content today is going to cover not only other parts of HUD, including our public and Indian housing programs, but it's also going to touch on the low-income housing tax credit, which, while it's primarily administered by through the tax code and through state housing finance agencies, it's the largest source of funding for construction of new affordable units, as well as the preservation of affordable units today, and thus it's a critical part of how our country can rise up and address the affordable housing shortage that it is facing. So I just, mostly just want to thank you all for being here, for recognizing the importance of the partnership between HUD and state governments. We know that we can't do this critical work with which our agency is tasked with doing, without, states and local governments. And so, more collaboration, more communication, more information sharing is a small part of how we're going to be, beating the affordable housing crisis and creating more affordable housing supply. So with that in mind, I'll turn it back to you, Joseph, or we can turn it over to Michael if that's the right path.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, David. We really appreciate that. Michael, if you are ready, I can go ahead and pull up those slides.
Yep, I am.
Okay. Bear with me one moment.
All right. As I said, I'm Mike Hollar. I'm a senior economist in HUD's Office of Policy Development and Research, and I'll be talking about the federal low-income housing tax credit today. You can move to the next slide. Thank you. I do emphasize federal. Most states do have their own state housing credit. About half the time it's used strictly with the federal tax credit. But there are a number of states that also allow it to be used separate. The federal low-income housing tax credit provides federal tax credits to developers of rental housing in exchange for maintaining income and rent restrictions. It's used to fund the construction or development of the program, and is generally used to replace or minimize the need for a mortgage. So the income and rent restrictions that are required by the statute must be maintained by the owners of the properties for a minimum of 30 years, but there is an opt-out provision after 15 years which the developers can do if certain conditions are met. The program overall, just to kind of give perspective, was developed. It was established in 1986, and over the life of the program, it's been producing on average, at least for the last couple of decades, about 100,000 new and substantially rehabilitated units annually. To give perspective, this accounts for roughly 20% of the new multifamily units that are constructed each year. As was mentioned earlier, even though it's a federal tax credit, the program is really administered through the states and through state housing finance agencies. I'll list the agencies in each of your states that are attending today's session on the next slide, just so you know exactly which agencies are involved. Developers can receive tax credits through one of two ways, and both of these again run through state agencies. First, the IRS allocates per capita, based on a per capita formula, tax credits to each state, and the states then award these tax credits through what's become a very competitive process. So in this case, the developers are applying directly for the tax credits. The second way to get these is through the use of tax-exempt bond revenue. And each state gets, again, an allocation from the IRS of bond authority that they can issue each year. These are then issued by state and local bond agencies, and the developers who get an allocation of this bond revenue automatically receives the low-income housing tax credits. The states are required to maintain what's called a qualified allocation plan, which explains how the state awards these tax credits, and in a lot of cases gives a lot of extra information about how they administer the program more generally. In addition to allocating the credits, the states also conduct program compliance. This includes ensuring that the income and rent restrictions are maintained, but it also includes physical inspections of the units and other aspects of program compliance. I'm going to advance to the next slide. These are the agencies that administer the tax credit for the regions that are in attendance today. I'll note that Massachusetts and New York both have separate agencies that issue the bonds, and then New York is one of 3 states nationwide that have that allow a local jurisdiction to administer the program. And so in New York State, New York City gets a separate allocation and they administer the program. The other 2 states, Illinois allows Chicago to do the same thing, and then Minnesota allows 7 of their cities and counties to also administer the program locally. Next slide. This is just a visualization of the process that I was just explaining. So the Internal Revenue Service allocates the tax credits or bond authority based on a per capita allocation formula to the state agencies. Developers then apply to these state agencies for the tax credits or the bond revenue, and then the states award those back to the developers. The Department of Housing and Urban Development has sort of an indirect role in this, where we calculate income limits for program eligibility, and those are also used to determine maximum rents. We also designate areas that are eligible for additional tax credits up to 30%. Those are called qualified census tracts, which are high poverty areas with high poverty or low income, a lot of sort of low income areas. And then the other are DDAs, difficult development areas, sort of on the other end of the real estate spectrum, and these are areas with high development costs. Next slide. And so states obviously have a large amount of significant influence over the types of properties and location of properties that receive the tax credits. The federal statute leaves pretty much all of this up to the states, although they do give 10 categories of criteria that are that the states are required to give preference to. These include 3 of the main ones are location, the types of targeted population, families, elderly, homeless, veterans, and then the amenities that are offered. This includes specifically energy efficiency and kind of also ties into location near grocery stores or schools or things like that. This program is primarily thought of as a multifamily rental production program, but I did want to emphasize one of the criteria that states are required to include is tenant ownership. And while states will include this, give preferences in varying ways, I would just want to point out two states, Ohio and Utah, that use this to develop single-family housing for eventual tenant ownership. And this is, Ohio has what they call a lease purchase program, where they give some education, and the rental payments then go towards the equity that then they can buy the home after the 15-year compliance period, which, as I explained before, they have this opt-out period. Owners are allowed to opt out after 15 years. And Ohio and Utah use this as a way to allow the occupants to purchase the home. Utah has a program they call the Crown Program, Credits to Own. And this is works very similarly, where the residents earn equity from their rental payments. These two states are the only ones that have sort of not just programs, but also set-asides. Ohio doesn't do this every year, but they will occasionally set aside credits for one property to receive this lease purchase through this lease purchase program. And then Utah actually sets aside 5% of their annual tax credits for their single-family tenant ownership Crown program. So that's a very quick rundown on the tax credit program, and just some of one example of innovative way that states can use this. So
Thanks.
I'll hand it back.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. I'm sure there'll be some questions for you afterwards. Next, Mr. Fobbs, if you'd like to, whenever you're ready.
All right. Well, thank you all for the opportunity to meet with you all today and share a little bit about who we are and what we do at HUD in the Office of Multifamily Housing. You can go to the next slide. As was mentioned, my name is Willie Fobbs. I'm the director of the Office of Multifamily Production here at HUD headquarters. I happen to been with HUD for 2.5 years now. I actually came to HUD from the Commonwealth of Virginia, where I worked with the state housing program, our State Department of Housing and Community Development, for over 20 years. So quite a bit of experience at the state level before joining the federal folks here at HUD. Just a little bit about what we do. Office of Multifamily Housing Programs provides mortgage insurance originated by FHA approved lenders to facilitate the construction, rehabilitation, repair, refinance, and purchase of multifamily rental housing. In addition, we administer rental assistance and preservation programs to provide stability, climate resilience, energy efficiency, affordability, and increase access to safe and affordable housing for the nation's workforce, low-income families, seniors, and persons with disabilities. I'll talk specifically about the Office of Production so you can get a little sense of what we're doing. Then I'm going to go into one of the programs that we use to partner with states to focus on the creation of that affordable housing. So in general, what we do at FHA, we insure rental housing, primarily apartments. We do have some other structures. We allow for the new construction, substantial rehab of existing properties, refinance or acquisition of properties that may have been initiated outside of HUD, and the ability to bring those to HUD. And then, some of the key advantages is that, our programs provide for long-term affordability, a fully amortizing loan, fixed rate debt, which is pretty attractive in the multifamily housing market. The benefit to the lenders who we partner with is that all of the loans that they make are insured by FHA. As I mentioned, our programs allow for a fairly high loan-to-value, loan-to-cost ratios. our focus is we ensure not only affordable properties, but also market rate properties and other properties that may have other sorts of rental assistance. So we span the spectrum with the programs that we administer. Um, uh, the primary programs that I'll talk about, you see there on the slide, the D4 program, which is our new construction substantial rehab, the F program, which is our refinance or acquisition, and the A7, which is the ability to refinance a previous HUD loan. But the final one, number 4, which is listed as risk share, is the one that I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about, because I think that'll give a sense of how we partner with states and how we're able to affect affordable housing at the state level. Next slide. So just a little bit of background. The risk share program began as a pilot that was governed under the Housing and Community Development Act back in 1992. It was made permanent in 2001. The act has 2 components. Section 542 of the Housing Act, Section B, focuses on our ability to partner and share the risk with what's known as a qualified participating entity. And you can see examples of who those are. Those are like the GSEs, Freddie Mae, Fannie Mac. And we're actually working right now with some recent modifications to try to expand that category. The 542C program, which is one I'm going to talk more about, directs HUD to carry out the program of risk sharing with qualified state and local housing finance agencies. And so what that means is that HUD is able to partner with these state and local housing finance agencies to share the risk associated with HUD fully guaranteeing and insuring the loan or any loans made on risk share properties. Provides full FHA insurance for affordable multifamily loans, which increases access to capital markets. All of our loans are made in general and securitized primarily with Ginnie Mae securities, so we're able to offer lower than market rates and in partnership with our risk share partners or state and local risk share partners. It's focused on promoting and increasing the supply of affordable housing and lowering the cost of financing of that housing. Under the risk share agreements, we completely delegate decision-making, underwriting, processing, loan servicing, and dispositions of properties that may fall into default. All of that is delegated at the state or local level, which gives complete flexibility. Basically, we go up front. There's an evaluation where HUD will evaluate existing state and local housing finance agency policies for minimum compliance with federal standards. And then we basically delegate the ability to run the program to states. So states don't have to create anything new. They're not required for any broader level of ongoing compliance other than once, we do that initial review and approval of state policies for underwriting. The risk share program provides 100% insurance for all risk share loans. And again, I mentioned that's new construction, substantial rehab, or refinance of existing loans. And for any loan, the term risk share, for any loan that happens to or undergoes a default, FHA, the federal HUD FHA, would pay 100% of the claim associated with that. And then the housing finance agency would repay its portion of the loss to HUD over the next 5 years. And what that does is it reduces exposure for both the state and local agencies as well as HUD by, of course, as I mentioned, sharing the loss. It establishes a partnership with dependable and creditworthy public and quasi-public entities to provide affordable housing in a more expeditious manner. Because as I mentioned, states can totally use their existing staff, personnel, policies, procedures, forms, everything to process loans and not have to have those go through any level of federal review. The key things to know about the risk share program, there's 2 levels, what we call level 1 and level 2 participant. Level 1 participant, which is generally where probably 3/4 of our entities fall into, a state HFA can elect to take 50% or more of the risk associated with any losses. A level 2 participant, states can elect to take anywhere from 10 to 25%. Currently, there are 38 housing finance agencies participating in the federal risk share program. 15 of those entities are level 1 only participants. 2 of those are level 2 only participants. And 21, the remaining agencies are approved for both level 1 and level 2. As I mentioned, the state or HFA becomes a delegated lender, loan servicer, and asset manager under this program. I think what the other point I really want to try to, stress, we have a risk share agreement that's in place. One of the things that it does is it kind of provides some benefits for both the state and local HFAs, housing finance agencies, as well as us at HUD. For the HFAs, the benefit is, you can combine permanent mortgage financing with other subsidy programs like the low-income housing tax credit program, for example, that was mentioned earlier. And it allows state and local HFAs to operate with a greater level of efficiency and coordination. They can potentially receive higher bond ratings for risk share loans, which can reduce interest rates and better support project financing feasibility. And as I mentioned, because all of the federal loans are secured by Ginnie Mae securities, that helps increase bond ratings for state entities and local entities. And they can also act as a permanent mortgage lender and earn higher revenue fees that the risk share program allows for, because again, they can use their own other resources and combine those. For HUD's benefit, it reduces the risk of loss, of course, as compared to the standard mortgage program, and it increases the affordable housing production that requires significantly fewer staff and resources compared to our traditional multifamily lending that goes on in our office. So a couple of other quick things I'll point out. HUD does not review the FHA commitment request regardless of the loan size, as I mentioned, because it's fully delegated, or potential project risk associated with that. A recent analysis found that 34 risk share loans were over, 34 of the risk share lenders average loans over $50 million each, with the largest being about $543 million. There are some general guidelines associated with the size of loans, but right now the 542C portfolio represents about a $9 billion unpaid principal balance that is on the risk share books. There's about 1,160, I think, active loans. And over the life of the 542 program, there have been roughly about 1,700 loans. So that's been an ongoing partnership, both between, state HFAs and local HFAs and HUD. And of the 38 currently approved HFAs, the activity is concentrated really at this stage in about 10 to 12 HFAs, the largest of which is the mass housing. Mass has historically been our leader in risk share volume and has originated most of the risk share loans in our portfolio. It's somewhere in the neighborhood of about 700 million with the mass housing, and they're followed closely by the New York Housing and Development Corporation, which is initiated about $500 million in a risk share loan. So that's just wanted to kind of highlight that program, tell you a little bit about it. And certainly, again, if there are questions at the end, I'm happy to answer any that may come along. So thanks.
Thanks, Willie. And actually, just a quick question. I don't know if you can answer this, but Mary Ann Joyce is asking where the program numbers come from. I think in reference to the 542. I don't know if is that from federal law?
The Housing and Community Development Act, is that what the question was? The 542, the location?
Yes, where those
yes.
numbers come from.
So that is in the federal law, the Housing and Community Development Act.
Okay.
I can, and I'm happy to put in the link where you can find reference to those, or put in the chat.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, great. And thank you again for that excellent presentation. We will be moving to Chris Granger. Chris, whenever you're ready.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be with this group. My name is Chris Granger, and I work for the Office of Capital Improvements, which is in the Office of Public Housing Investments. And I have been with HUD for 15 years, and most of my time has been spent working on the capital fund program, and which I'll talk about, and our peripheral programs. The This presentation is a version of a presentation that we do for NARO events for public housing agencies, so housing authorities, who every state has housing authorities and has public housing. So we give these presentations to the state events, and we have a 2-day presentation. It's 8 hours a day, so it's total 16 hours. We've truncated that into a 1-day presentation, and so because some entities request that we only do 1 day, and sometimes they say, well, maybe only 3 hours or 2 90-minute sessions. And so we've truncated this presentation quite a bit. And today I have about 5 minutes. So you're going to get I think the most important distilled 5 minutes of this 2-day presentation. So let me tell you first what the capital fund is, and then I'll talk about how the capital fund is used for development of new public housing units, and we'll talk about some other programs that are related to the capital fund. And just, full disclosure, the programs that I'm going to be talking about, they work in tandem many times with what Mike talked about, because and I loved the chart that you put up, Mike. So I think everybody, if you're going to take a cheat sheet away from this presentation, I think Mike's chart is the cheat sheet, because that really breaks down the process for tax credits. And tax credits have been a very successful tool for development in both public housing and other affordable housing. So let me first many of us know what public housing is, but just a reminder, public housing is a specific type of affordable housing. We have around 800,000 units nationwide. That's in all 50 states and the District of Columbia and several territories. And these are administered by public housing agencies. So that's the housing authority. Every year, and this is all subject to appropriations, so this number could change any year, but every year we award our annual formula grant, which is $3 billion and capital funds, and that is split among all of the public housing agencies. This $3 billion annually can be used for many activities, but primarily it's for development of new units, and it's for modernization of existing units. So when I say development, I'm talking about kind of 3 things. One is a housing authority has some land that they already own, and they want to build new units. Can they do that? Yes, they can. So that's the first kind of development. The second kind is the housing authority goes out and buys some land. So they do a land acquisition deal, and then they build the new units on the land. And the third kind is they buy new units that are already built. And each of those transactions requires a little bit, they're all a little bit different, but ultimately the goal is to bring new public housing units online. So one of the key tools that we use for public housing development is called the Capital Fund Financing Program. And the the Capital Fund Financing Program, and I think that's on the next slide. I want to talk about this. This is a great tool for housing authorities to inject cash into their portfolio now, and it allows them to borrow against future capital fund appropriations. So effectively, they are taking on a loan, like a conventional loan, and we work with banks on the loans, regular banks. We also can underwrite bonds for housing authorities. And I think right now, um, usually if it's over 10 million, a bond is more cost effective because of the fee structure. And if it's under 10 million, usually a loan is more cost effective. But that's a ballpark. It may depend on the issuing agency and the interest rate and things like that. But typically that's kind of the ballpark cutoff. And so the housing authority would borrow money through the loan or the bond, and they would use the proceeds to develop new units. And again, when I say develop, I mean they would either build on land they already have, or they would buy new land and build on it, or they would just buy new units. And all three of those things can happen, and they do happen. They also could buy, and we'll talk about this in a minute, but they could do a development deal using their capital fund financing proceeds, and they could tie it in with a tax credit deal like what Mike was talking about it. So we actually have some of these deals where we are mixing funding streams, and you have tiers of affordable housing units in a single housing development. And those blends have become more and more common. The debt service is limited to 33% of the capital fund grant. So remember that $3 billion annually, it gets divided up among all the housing authorities in the country. And then the housing of each individual housing authority receives an allocation. They get their grant. They can only use up to 33% of that grant as debt service. So that means that they hang on to 67% of their grant every year. And the good thing is that HUD doesn't make the housing authority make the payment. We actually set up the payment in our financial system in advance. Once these projects are approved and underwritten, we set it up in our system in advance in our ELOC system, so that the housing authority doesn't have to make the payment. We make the payment. So the housing authority never sees the money. We send it to pay off the debt service. And that also makes this an attractive program because the lenders are all but guaranteed payment. The only way that we would not make the payment is if the program was there was no appropriations for the program, and even if that happened, we would figure out a way to defease it. And we have never defaulted on any CFFP transaction. We've never defaulted. We are 100% payment success. The term is 20 years, but it doesn't have to be. The PHA can borrow and pay debt up to 20 years, but if they want to increase the payment size and decrease the years, they can. I've seen them 10 years, 15 years. I've seen early payoffs. There are multiple ways to do this, and we have plenty of information. We've spilled a lot of ink on this on our website, and we do a longer training series on this, and we have on our website, we have training videos, we have online resources, and We have a lot of stuff there, so it's worth checking out. And of course, be able to answer questions on this. I do want to talk about some of these other programs that are related to the CFFP and related to the capital fund. So moving on, we have these are three call out programs that are related. So we have the mixed finance development. And so mixed finance is our term, meaning that a development has some public housing, but it's not all public housing. Remember, public housing is, when I'm talking about public housing, I'm talking about the HUD public housing program. This is one of HUD's legacy programs. This program predates HUD. It predates a lot of programs. It's from the New Deal. It's one of the first affordable housing programs. Not all units that are affordable housing are public housing. So mixed finance development is where you have the housing authority will develop new units, and some of them will be public housing, and some of them will probably be tax credits, and some of them could be other sources, like we could put CDBG money or home money from our community planning and development partners with us. So that's another HUD office, and we sometimes come up with these mixed finance developments that have market rate units in them. So not just affordable units, but they're actually for market, whatever the market rate is. You might have 30% of the units in a development, or 60% of the units in a development could be just going at the market rate. And that's a good thing, because it means that we are deconcentrating poverty. It means that we have folks who are commingling with each other, and it means that we have the affordable units are mixed in with the regular units, and so all the kids there get to grow up together, and there's not a stigma around it. So the mixed finance development is very successful, and housing authorities have done some amazing things with mixed finance. The next one is the Section 30 Public Housing Mortgage Program. So here's the thing about public housing. HUD must, let me backtrack. So we do not allow encumbrances on public housing properties. So effectively, what I mean by an encumbrance is somebody who doesn't own the property cannot make a claim against the property unless HUD approves it. And so this public housing mortgage program means that the housing authority is able to secure specific types of financing, and we can secure it against the mortgage, or effectively against the property. And so these are not done, flippantly. These are specific programs that we're talking about. Usually they are loans from the federal home loan banks that convert to grants after a period of 10 years when the property is in affordable housing. And we can underwrite it against something called the Declaration of Trust or the Declaration of Restricted Covenant, depending on the type of housing. And what that means is that HUD is always in first position if there's ever a lien against a property or anything like that. So what we've done with the Section 30 Public Housing Mortgage Program is we've underwritten projects where housing authorities have secured financing from other entities and usually combined it with the capital fund grant that I talked about earlier, that $3 billion annually. The final program I want to talk about is the Choice Neighborhoods Program. This is a highly competitive program. It comes out in a NOFO every year. That's a Notice of Funding Opportunity. And housing authorities can apply for up to $50 million. And this is to address not just public housing, but it's meant to build up a whole neighborhood. And the idea is that these grants would be part of a larger revitalization project for a neighborhood and for a city. And so very important to know that the $50 million is for what we call implementation grants. That means that they are actually doing the building, the sticks and bricks. There is something called a planning grant, and the idea is the housing authority would come in first and get a planning grant, and then they would take some time, use their grant to engage the residents and build support for their transformation plan, and then they would undertake the neighborhood improvement project. And these are best suited for redevelopment of distressed housing as part of a comprehensive neighborhood revitalization. And of course, new housing may include a mix of units. These could be tax credits, they could be public housing, they could be Section 8 project-based units. And these are all to the residents, the physical look of the units wouldn't be different. The idea is they would all look the same. The difference is in the actual way that they are funded and operated at the housing authority level, and of course monitored at the HUD level and the state level. Some of the the considerations we have to make, and when we are giving technical assistance to housing authorities, is that every state has different laws around procurement and environmental reviews. We have federal standards that we always adhere to, but if the state standards are more stringent, then the housing authority must adhere to whichever is most stringent. So we are continually updating and educating ourselves so that we can give technical assistance about different state requirements for procurement and environmental reviews. And so some of those could be the small purchase limit.
Chris, I'm so sorry to interrupt you. I just we are running a little bit short on time.
Yeah, that's how I do things.
I know you
so.
you squeeze it. If you're able to make a couple final points, then we'll definitely get to the Q&A. But I do want to make sure we have enough time for everyone.
Why don't we move on then? I could talk forever about this program. This is a passion of mine. So
okay, sorry again to interrupt, but yes, we do have a few speakers here today. But this was a very informative presentation, so we do appreciate it. And next up, we'll be hearing from Commissioner Sheila Mosquera-Bruno, who again leads the Connecticut Department of Housing. And then we will afterwards get to a question and answer session. So get your questions ready. And Commissioner, when you are ready, you have the floor.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you, Joseph. Good morning, everyone. And I won't go into details of why are we doing this, but we all know that we have a shortage of affordable housing. So I'll just go into what we're doing at the state. So my name is Sheila Mosquera-Bruno. I'm the Commissioner of Connecticut Department of Housing, but I'm also the board chair of the Connecticut Housing Finance Authority, which is the agency that administers the low-income housing tax credits. And as a background, I used to be an affordable housing developer. I was the CEO of a NeighborWorks America member in Connecticut. So we are actually, I have been blessed with the governor and the legislators that last year they allocated $800 million in state bonds for the production of affordable housing and also the promotion of homeownership. So of that $800 million, $200 million is dedicated to a new program that we created called Bill for CT, which is a loan product to incentivize for-profit developers to give us at least 20% of their private units to make them affordable. And the way that we work with them is very simple. we engage, they have to have a primary lender. We are a subordinate loan. It can be 1 to 3% interest rate. What we're trying to address was the need for inexpensive capital so that those units that were stuck because the interest rate was so high, they could move on to production. And that those units, the 20% affordable, at least 20% affordable, we targeted middle income individuals between 60% up to 120% of AMI. Program has been very successful since last year. We have 1,648 units that are under construction, with 448 units affordable in the private sector. Then on the regular, I call it regular affordable housing, but really what our policy is, we do 80% affordable with finance, 80% affordable, 20% unrestricted. And I call it unrestricted because I encourage our developers to really lower a 1 or 2% below the market so that we not keep inflating and trying to decompress a little bit the markets. So we had about $600 million that we are utilizing for the production of affordable housing, and also preservation, because we can't forget a lot of the units, tax credit units that are coming to the year end of compliance, and we wanted to make sure that those units are kept in production. And $150 million of that was for down payment and closing costs for homeownership. And I know we're not going to talk about homeownership, we're going to talk about the multifamily. But in the past 2 years, we have had so much success with that program that about 4,500 individuals became homeowners for the first time with those resources. What we have done, I became commissioner in 2019. So in the first term, this is my second term. I'm in my second term, the first year. So we started in 2019. We completed 12,600 units, and that was new construction and preservation and some home ownership, because we're also encouraging people to produce for sale housing. Right now on the construction, we have a little over 5,000 units. Again, production in preservation, the state has invested about $244 million and $1.3 billion in between private money as well as other public sources. The Department of Housing, I forgot to mention that we also managed, in addition to the state funding for housing, we also manage all the federal resources that we receive with the HOME, CDBG, ARPA, and the Section 8. We also are the administrator for Section 8. We act as a statewide public housing in the state. Tax credits, because I'm also the board chair of the Connecticut Housing Finance Authority, we try to align our resources. So the 9%, which it was mentioned, usually yield about 6 projects in a year because we only get an allocation of about $10 million. But we have been using the 4% tax credits to pair up with our bonds, the $600 million that I mentioned that we have available. So what we do is that we allow up to $4 million from our bonds. We encourage the 4% because the 4% is not restricted, so it's not a competition, because it's about 30% of the cost. And because we have subsidy, and then we also pair up with our federal resources like Home ARPA, we have utilized it a lot, and almost we're done with that. The home funds, and we also use CDBG, and we manage the CDBG for small towns, which are non-entitlement communities. And what we do with them is that we provide, we work with the municipality, because the municipality has to apply, but they apply for infrastructure, and this is for smaller projects. So let's say they apply for the infrastructure because it's rural areas where they come in, they do the roads, they build all the infrastructure, and then we come in with our bonds funds and we provide the resources. For an example, we have a town where we are We provided $2.9 million in CDBG. Once they finish the infrastructure, we're putting in another $3.3 million. They build in 10 houses for sale, net zero. So they're also doing a lot of the solar panels and all those environmental issues that we have to deal with. On another example, how do we use the 9% and bring home ARPA into that project is 46 units in a small town, affluent town actually, and 80% of those units are affordable. And we then they got 9%. We brought in $3 million in ARPA funds because their units go between 30% of AMI to 80% of AMI, and they also provide supportive units for some of the homeless populations. So the home ARPA was really integral part of that. And then we brought in $3.6 million for estate bonds. So what we're trying to do is to maximize the tax credits with our bonds in order to produce more units. The other thing that we're doing just to make sure that our nonprofit developers can compete and can continue with the production. Last year, I provided kind of a line of credits, $500,000 to 6 nonprofits so that they actually had the resources instead of going for project by project, and then they can recycle. We did a term of 5 years, 0% interest rate. So when they do a project, they can come back and they can pay it off. But at the same token, in addition to the pre-development, I provided operating support. And what I did was I put in about $900,000. I invited a bank, M&T at that time, put another $1 million, and we basically gave grants of about $400,000 for each of the 6 organizations, more or less, because some of them, the smaller ones, got about $200,000. The ones that had a big production goals, then we did up to $400,000, because when you are on the development side as a nonprofit, you really don't get the money until you get your developer's fee, which is 2 years or whatever years the project takes. So I have been trying to incentivize and provide the financial support so that the organization, the nonprofit, which are the ones that provide most of the units, supportive units, and the deep affordability to our residents in Connecticut. So I'll leave it at that because I think we're close so that people can ask questions.
Oh, thank you so much, Commissioner. We do have some time. I know we're coming up on 12:30. I think we were aiming to go a little over for leaving some time for discussion. So if anybody does want to ask questions, feel free to put those in the Q&A or in the chat. You can also raise your hand and we will unmute your microphone so you can just ask your question directly. But to start off, we did get some questions coming in advance. So maybe I'll start here with a question from Representative Larry Lambert, representative from Delaware, submitted a question asking, how can states adequately calculate the total cost of fixing the affordable housing crisis? Without having an adequate scope, it's hard to properly address the crisis or make informed decisions. Commissioner, I don't know if you want to take this first, and then if anybody at HUD wants to attempt an answer at this one.
I can try. So it'd be difficult to put a number, right? But in Connecticut, for example, we have a number of 98,000 units, affordable units, which people will say we need that. Well, it's not really that we need 98,000 units. 98,000 families are paying more than 50% of their income. And those families, so the gap on affordability is for those individuals that are between 30% and 50% of AMI. Let's say an average of 25,000 for a family of 2 or 3, right? So those individuals, minimum wages workers, cannot afford, and they pay more than the 50%. So we can do it with production. The state, we wouldn't be able to produce 98,000 units, right? But for the affordability piece, so we're building affordable units. We would like our federal partners to give us a little more, and we will get there, right? But also Section 8 and rental assistance is another way that we can also mitigate and manage some of the affordability issues. So the state has some of the rental assistance from the federal government. We also have a state rental assistance. So we have, when we build affordable, when we build the middle income, when we help families to go into the home ownership, because we're trying to do the spectrum of housing, right? From emergency housing, and I'm not calling shelter, I'm calling emergency housing, because we are changing also that how we provide that emergency support to those individuals that need it the most in Connecticut, to all the way to the homeownership. So we are trying to produce, and we will keep producing more. We did a study that gave us that number about, that was in 2019. So we need to do a new one to see where we are. And right now, the only way that we can look at it, the need that we have, is through the occupancy rate, right? We have in Connecticut, I think, is 3% occupancy rate. So we know that we need more, and we need more affordability, because our families are paying a lot more. As you look at how many people are in the working at minimum wages, we have a lot of people, so that they're paying a lot of money.
Thank you. Thank you. Looking at some of the other questions we have here. We also got a question from Joshua Berry, who is the Chief of Municipal Planning and Programming for the Rhode Island Department of Housing. He's asking, how do you adapt affordable housing development strategies for urban, suburban, and rural communities? So I think, how do the approaches differ? And if you have any best practices for doing so. Anybody have an answer to this one? The difference for urban, suburban, and rural?
I can give you a little bit of what we're doing with the rural. And then, so in the urban, city has capacity to do some of the work. In the rural areas, they don't. So what I'm doing in one corner of the state is providing resources to one organization who has the capacity, because the person that is running is a planner. And I provided grants for the operation, but I also provided feasibility grants. So that means that the towns that have they have land, and they would like to, and we're incentivizing that actually to put that land so they can be built for affordable housing, $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 grant, so that they can do that work. And that has worked pretty well. In that small corner, we started 3 years ago, and we have about 300 units, which is smaller, but it's a rural area where the towns actually have come together, and they're working together in different areas, providing rental and home ownership.
I'd like to comment on that, and because Sheila, that's a astute point, is that you're talking about bringing the community together and making the community part of the process. And we have to do that and urban communities have different needs and different requirements. And, there are some differences where in the urban landscape, sometimes we're building up more, and in the rural landscape, we're building out more because there's more land available. I would say a few considerations are the environmental side is one consideration. There are different environmental issues depending on if it's urban or rural. Usually, if it's urban development, all of the environmental issues have already been considered for similar development. So the environmental reviews sometimes are easier, but you also should consider noise and things like that. Like, we would never put children near an airport because the damage to hearing is too great. Conversely, in the rural areas, you may run into more floodplain management issues, and we can't build housing in a floodway, of course, but we don't want to build in an area that's uninsurable. The other side of it is for all of our money, we have to adhere to prevailing wages, and the wage rates could change depending on if you are in an urban or a rural or a suburban locale, because the trades and the different there are labor issues, union issues, and things like that. So those are some other considerations, and I'd say that the final, I think, consideration is that we also do care about the architectural character of the city, and we wouldn't want to build something that looks different, drastically different from what they already have. So we do want to blend in as much as possible. And I could go on. The last thing I'll say is transportation. We want to build near transportation, especially in the rural places, because many of these people don't own their own cars who are living in affordable housing, or they don't have a car yet. And so we do need to consider that.
Thank you. Another question, I think maybe for Mike, but can you unpack some of the differences between the 4% and the 9% LIHTC, and maybe any critical considerations to make when approaching a comprehensive development strategy? The differences between how to use the 4% and 9%.
Yeah, and just so that to kind of so everyone understands, if you get allocated credits where you apply to the state competitive process, those are the 9% credits. And if you get the bond revenue, the credits associated with that are 4%. Those are the credit percentages multiplied times the development costs, which determines the number of tax credits that you receive. Kind of the way I think it kind of works in practice is if you're able to score kind of high on some of the state priorities, and then you go for the 9% credits. Those are obviously more valuable. You get more credits, and but again, it's a very competitive process, and so sometimes developers aren't able to meet some of the priorities that the states are setting, or there may be just too much competition in the area that they're building. So I think that's one of the overriding factors for whether or not developers go for the 9% versus the 4% credits. I think what was the second half of that question about kind of a strategy?
Yes, on when to think about the 4%, using one versus the other.
Yeah, I think it really depends on how you fit in some of the QAP priorities, and if you're building within kind of where the state wants you to, and depending on I think a lot of times on the competitiveness of it. That's when developers will, if you can score high on that, then you go for the more competitive but more highly valued credits.
Josh, I can add a little more, Michael, if you allow me. The way that we use it, because the 4% is actually the ones that we produce more, is because we also have the bond from the state. Because as Mike said, 4% is less valuable than the 9%. 9% brings you about 70% of the total development cost, and the 4% is about 30%, more or less. It's not exactly, but so you will have a bigger gap, especially as you're providing the low income units, because you don't collect that much rent. So the way that we prioritize the 4% are people that are ready. We have a simple process for people to apply to us, which is called a development engagement process. We open it up twice a year, and that gives the opportunity to developers to come in to put their project. They don't even have to identify the resources. They can give us an idea, but then we looked at those projects. If they're ready to go, within 120 days they can proceed. We can suggest to go through the 9%, through the 4%, because it's not competitive, and we'll provide the additional resources that we need, especially if there are in areas where we need more units that needs to be affordable.
Okay, great. Hopefully we have time for just a couple more questions. From Maine, we have Representative Gear asking, does anyone have guidance on developing in areas with extremely high housing costs? This can be driven by seasonal ownership, tourism, or restrictive zoning, where affordable and attainable housing is needed. So where costs are already very high, any strategies on developing in those areas? Does anybody want to take a Mike?
I'll just chime in from the low-income housing tax credit perspective. That's I very briefly mentioned the difficult development areas, which are areas that have defined in statute as high land, construction, and utility costs relative to the area median income. HUD designates these areas, and if a developer locates in one of those, they get an additional 30% tax credits than they would otherwise receive. So that's sort of one way that is trying to help development in these higher cost areas.
I can, there are sometimes there are opportunities, and we need to be open to every opportunity, especially in those high cost areas. Just I was mentioning to you that we did a ribbon cutting yesterday for 19 units in a very high end community in Westport, Connecticut. And there was a for-profit developer. He worked for 5 years through zoning and through a lot of issues, 830G, which is a law that we have to help to develop more affordable housing. And 6 months ago, we were talking, and one of the nonprofits that provides services in that area wanted to do more housing. So he jokingly said, I sell you the building so you can make it affordable housing. This is a for-profit guy. And we said, yes. So we were lucky that we have ARPA funds that we could utilize it for acquisition. So we struck a deal, we did our due diligence, and in 6 months for us, we put 19 supportive units in a community that does not have, probably has very, very, very few units. So and we did another transaction like that where we provided the acquisition funds. So I encourage people to also look at your community, to your developers, to the for-profit developers. And for-profit developers sometimes can be sensitive to the needs, and as long as the property appraised to the value, because we have to follow our regulations, then there can be opportunities where private and public partnership can happen in that way.
Okay, great. Seeing that we are coming up on time, maybe a final question, and maybe we can just, all the speakers can give their final thoughts on this. How states can be more competitive in applying for some of this funding or these programs, or if you have any final thoughts on how states can continue partnering with either your office or the federal government. Just any last thoughts before we wrap up? Do we want to start with anybody want to jump in first, or Willie, or?
I would. So I mean, I'll speak specifically to what I talked about on the risk share program, but I think there it really is about long-term planning. I know that there's always the dual sided of what are our immediate needs and how do we address those, and then there's kind of the longer term directions. And so I think, as far as risk share, it is, I'm not going to, act like it's no cost to the state in terms of infrastructure, staffing, those types of things, right? Because it is, but it also, again, I think in the long run, brings less costlier financing opportunities and options to addressing, broader multifamily and rental in general, I guess, issues. I think the other side is, there's, and it's in line, I guess, with that longer term planning. I mean, obviously, there are also a number of soft funding sources that are out there, and it does take some exploration, because ultimately, across the board, we know costs are rising, construction costs are increasing, costs of long-term home ownership are increasing. So it is as much about finding those those what we generally refer to as soft sources to bring to the table. And HUD is certainly willing to, as much as possible, work with state and local entities on ways to integrate those soft sources. And if, for us, that often means looking at existing policies or things like that to kind of make those adjustments. I mean, we're certainly, encourage that, and our offices are open to as much as we can within the letter of the law doing that. So that's the only thing I would add.
Great.
I'm happy to go next.
Please.
So another item that comes into play here is the long-term viability of existing public housing, existing affordable housing, and the housing authorities are. We give them capital funds, and we give them other sources of income, other sources of grant funds, but the housing authorities are responsible for the long-term viability of their properties, and there is a capital needs backlog where we have housing authorities that have nationwide tremendous capital needs, but we don't fully know what the need is nationwide because it's growing. And so doing assessments is very important. Physical needs assessments is important, because when the housing authorities are, when they're able to modernize and maintain their existing public housing, then that enables them to use more of their future grant funds for development of new units. So what I'm talking about is ensuring that all of their offline units are brought online. So these are unoccupied units that housing authorities may have, and those are potentially units that families could move into. It also means increasing energy efficiency for utility savings, and the housing authorities are, when they are more viable, then more of their funds can be diverted away from modernization and maintenance and can be diverted into new development.
Okay. Any final thoughts from Michael or Commissioner before we call it?
Yeah, I'll just say that the low-income housing tax credit was sort of designed with maximum flexibility, so it's often combined with lots of other programs, both state and federal, and really allows states to kind of tailor it to their own needs. So I think it's a big reason why it's become sort of the main subsidy program for production.
Thank you, Joseph. I'll go next. So for us and for me is designing a comprehensive approach to housing, because many times we have so many different programs internally. We sometimes don't know how we use the rental assistance, how do we use the production and the preservation, because I got my unit with CDBG. So my intention has been to bring them all into one umbrella and say, okay, we're going to take a comprehensive approach to our emergency housing, to our production, to our preservation, and the resources that we have. How do we bring them together to make sure, like we have 811, so we bring those extra resources so that we can do the production. So this next year, as we move along, it will be about bringing all our resources together from rental assistance, production, and how do we combine them, and also now we have to reach out to our private sector, our bankers, and our financial institutions to make sure that they also are in working together with us. And my job is also to try to facilitate and make it easier some of the regulation, because we have programs that sometimes contradict each other. So how to operationalize those resources. And as I tell my legislators, don't make a lot of rules, give me a little more general framework so that we can be proactive and take advantage of the opportunities that we have.
Excellent, excellent. Well, on that note, I just want to give a big thank you to all of our speakers, our experts at HUD, Commissioner in Connecticut, for sharing your insights, for presenting and taking part of this conversation with us today. And then a reminder for all of our attendees that we do have 2 more sessions coming up in this series. In fact, this Thursday, we'll be joined by Secretary Jake Day from Maryland's Department of Housing. We'll be talking about community development and housing development. So again, thank you all to our speakers. Thank you to our attendees. This is a great session, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.